Today's big show is going to focus on labor unions during the industrialization period we've been studying. There are two types of industrial workers during this time period. There were the craft workers, those people that had special types of skills and training, for example, machinists or iron workers or stone cutters. And then the more prevalent type, the one where there's more of them, would be the common laborers. And these people would have very few skills and they would make very low wages. This is where you would see oftentimes child labor because the children wouldn't have any particular skills and they would be placed in jobs like this and paid very low wages. Business leaders were extremely against industrial unions. People like Andrew Carnegie did not like labor unions. And they used several techniques to stop unions. They made workers sign contracts promising not to join unions. Those were known as yellow dog contracts. Companies hired detectives to identify union organizers. The Pinkertons were used in this case. This was a national detective agency, and they were used to secretly infiltrate unions and figure out who the organizers were, and those people would get fired. They had blacklists where they would identify troublemakers like union organizers, and then no company would hire those people. This political cartoon shows a union organizer coming against another laborer. This was during a particular election, and the union organizer was shown as being somehow not truly American and not what's best for America at that time. Whether he was or wasn't isn't really the point. It was just used in this political ad. Companies also used lockouts, a tool to fight union demands by refusing to allow employees to enter its facilities to work. This only worked because there were so many people looking for work, so many unemployed people, that they would lock out people who wanted to strike for better working conditions or better wages and bring in other people. So let's talk for a moment about the Great Railroad Strike. This was about 1877. It was actually caused by the Panic of 1873, which was an economic depression. Wages were slashed and repeatedly over a couple-year period of time. And eventually 80,000 railroad workers walked off the job, but they didn't just go on strike. They tore up tracks and burned trains and stations, and the entire nation's railroad system was impacted. And if you remember earlier, we talked about the importance of railroads. This was a major issue. President Hayes, who at the time mobilized federal troops, and more than 100 strikers were killed. The Knights of Labor opposed strikes in favor of boycotts and arbitration, which is settling a dispute by agreeing to accept the decision of an impartial outsider. Now, in 1886, there was this Haymarket riot. There was a push for an 8-hour workday, and the union organizers called for a general strike among all the workers on May 1st, May Day. On May 3rd, the strike was still going on, and Chicago police tried to break up the picket line of strikers and opened fire on the protesters, killing 4. So the next day, 3,000 people gathered at the Haymarket Square in Chicago to protest the police shootings. Then someone, unknown to this day who it was, threw a dynamite bomb toward the police. The police panicked, and in the darkness, this was at night, many shot at their own men. Eventually, 7 policemen were killed, and only 1 was directly accountable to being killed by the bomb. 4 workers were also killed. So there was this kind of wild scene in which police were scared and they were shooting in all directions and ended up shooting a lot of their fellow police officers. One of the workers arrested, of the 4 workers arrested, one of them was a member of the Knights of Labor, and this was a fatal blow to the Union. Let's talk for a minute about the Homestead Steel Strike. Carnegie Steel first cut wages by 20% and then imposed a lockout of employees who were members of the union. at their Homestead Steel factory in Pennsylvania. When the Pinkerton detectives brought in replacement workers, the strikers resisted. And over the next 14 hours, there was this open gun battle between the two groups. And this would go on, and several people were killed. The governor of Pennsylvania sent in the militia to protect strikebreakers, and the strike ended with a loss to the Union. So the government intervened on the side of the company. Now, the American Federation of Labor was the dominant labor organization of the late 1800s. It was led by Samuel Gompers, pictured here. They focus on protecting the rights of skilled workers. And they had three goals: get companies to recognize unions and agree to collective bargaining for skilled workers. People with skills, not common laborers, but craft workers. They wanted to close shop. Companies could only hire union employees for skilled jobs, and an 8-hour workday for skilled workers. Now that contrasts directly with this next organization known as the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. They were nicknamed the Wobblies. Now it's kind of an odd nickname. One of the best explanations of where the nickname the Wobblies came from, and it's still a matter of debate. They unionized many foreign-born workers, many people whose native language wasn't English. And when they would try to say IWW, it sounded like I wobble wobble, according to the people of the time. And so they became nicknamed the Wobblies. That's at least how one story goes. They believed that all workers should be organized into one big union, especially the unskilled workers ignored by most other unions. And as this IWW poster shows, a common saying in the IWW was that the working class and the employing class have nothing in common. This was an in-your-face type of union. And the last section we're going to talk about is women and organized labor. By 1900, women made up more than 18% of the workforce. However, women were paid less than men for doing the same jobs, and most unions excluded women. Mother Jones, Mary Harris Jones, was a very successful labor organizer, so much so that John D. Rockefeller called her the most dangerous woman in America. I put this quote in a picture of Mother Jones, this woman described as the most dangerous woman in America. She said that solidarity is what we want. We do not want to find fault with each other, but to solidify our forces and say to each other, we must be together. Our masters are joined together, and we must do the same thing. Then there was the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. These represented female and male workers in the women's clothing industry, especially New York City. And the Women's Trade Union League, which was a separate union for women, and they pushed for an 8-hour workday, minimum wage, and an abolition of child labor. And there's your big show on unions.